Hello, and welcome back to My Pop 5. We have another incredible guest here for you by the name of Holland Baker. Holland is a fellow podcaster and lover of all things pop culture. I had such a good time chatting with Holland because she really digs deep into the things that she loves, and it really was infectious and made me want to go through and binge everything that's here on her Pop 5. Let's get into it. Here is our episode with Holland Baker. Hello, everyone. We are here with Holland Baker. She is an incredible podcaster. She has two shows that I love very much, and I've had the chance to kind of listen to a lot of them over the past 5-6 years of my life. So I'm so excited to meet with her. She's also a production editor and has worked in the journalism and publication space for a long time, and I'm really excited to chat with you. So Holland, thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
Yes, it's so interesting for me. You and I had a chance to chat once before. You did your show, Whatever It Takes, the Degrassi podcast. And I was at one point a patron of that show, and I got to come on and chat with you. And what's super funny to me is when we were chatting about this, I had mentioned that what's interesting is both you and your partner, Kelsey, on that show, I would listen to you guys once a week. And so I felt like I knew you guys in some aspect because I had that chance to listen every week. But to me, just a stranger popping on. So it's cool to kind of get a chance to chat with you again. I obviously don't know you, only what's part of on the show, but it's like I learned so much about your likes and dislikes and your opinions from the show. It's just an interesting dynamic. It's kind of cool to just get to geek out about more of this stuff.
Yeah, totally. I know you were there for our very short-lived Patreon moment in time. I think we signed up for that and then shortly realized, we cannot keep up with all of this extra content because for the most part, all of the both of the podcasts that I have done have purely been hobbies on the side. And everyone I've done a podcast with, we all have full-time jobs that we do otherwise. So kind of trying to dedicate yourself to a podcast full-time it's a bigger time commitment than you really realize, I think. So Patreon fell by the wayside very quickly, but I appreciate you being a patron for the brief time that you are.
Yeah. What I think is interesting with a lot of just podcasts and content in general, people have this relationship with podcasters or YouTubers. Those shows expand for such a long period of time. You grow and live your life. I remember when I first was listening to the show, it was pre-touring with my band at the time. And I was working as a manager in a Cold Stone listening to the show,
Oh my God.
Now these years later, I am in Los Angeles and doing my thing here. And then you guys, your life changes. You moved various different apartments throughout that show and life updates with both you and Kelsey, and life changes and the growth that you see in a time period just with this one small piece of connection is just kind of interesting.
I know. We did the show for 5 years, which I still cannot believe I can't believe we actually watched every single episode of Degrassi, The Next Generation / Next Class / just Degrassi. I think many times along the way, we totally thought we were going to not finish. I think we were like, well, we'll just do Next Generation. Oh, well, then we'll just finish the regular before Next Class. And then it's like, well, we're already here. It's, yeah. Both Kelsey and I are very much completionists. So we couldn't not finish it. And now it's like, well, are we going to go back and watch the original Degrassi from the 80s? I don't know. Maybe eventually. But yeah, definitely. I think a common theme with a lot of the things I think I put on my Pop 5 have to do with kind of fandom, but also connection with people that you don't actually know in person. I think a lot of things that you like, especially now with social media, you could just go on Twitter, you can go on a forum, you can find a whole community of people who like the same things that you do. And you might not ever actually meet them in person, but you have these people who you communicate with on a semi-regular basis who kind of know you and kind of know your opinions, or you can commune on similar ideas. Yeah, I don't really know where I'm going with that now, but it's a really interesting time that we're living in.
Totally. Well, let's get into it. I like to ask all of our guests as we get started. Can you name what your Pop 5 is with no comment, no context? What is your Pop 5?
Yes. Harry Potter, Blink-182, Degrassi, The Next Generation, Teen Vogue, and BTS.
Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and get into it. But just before we do, one, what kind of got you? I know you went to school for journalism and things like that, but where did you grow up? And tell us a bit about your life's journey so far.
Yeah, I grew up in Northern California in a suburb of Sacramento. I kind of grew up between Sacramento and South Tahoe. So in like gold rush territory, if that means anything to anybody. I know a lot about the California gold rush. So if you have any questions, let me know. And I went to college, Mizzou, University of Missouri, for journalism. And I originally went into it for magazine journalism. And I got my bachelor's in magazine editing, technically. And then I actually lived in Southern California for a year after I graduated, kind of trying to figure out if I could work in media in Los Angeles. Didn't happen. I also hated it there. No offense. It's not for me. It was also just a rough year. I just graduated. I didn't know anybody. I was living with my mom. And it was extremely isolating. And then when I did get a job, I was commuting from Orange County to Westwood every day, which was like a solid 2 hours of traffic each way. And it was miserable. And I did that for 6 months and I was like, never again. So I'm sure the context also clouded my judgment of Los Angeles. But in the midst of my commuting hell, I did actually fall hard into podcasts. I started listening to a lot of podcasts, like Pete Holmes's You Made It Weird. I listened to like Allison Rosen is Your New Best Friend. I listened to a Harry Potter reread podcast, which I will probably touch on again later. In the midst of this, one of my friends who was also kind of going through the similar thing, living at home in Chicago post-graduation, and we were both miserable and wanted to escape, and we both decided to move to New York together. So because we were living at home, we could kind of save up to do that, and then come January of 2015, we pulled the trigger and moved to New York without any job prospects, and just kind of made it work.
That's bold, especially because, I mean, it's true for both LA and New York. It's so expensive, right? So, I mean, you said you saved, but going without a job is also frightening.
Yeah, but the thing, at least in magazines, at least at the time, you have to kind of be there to really be seriously considered. In media in general, I think there's not a lot of, oh yeah, you're out of state, great, come join us. We'll pay for you to. That does not happen, especially now when it's more of a freelancer's game and they don't want to pay for your health insurance anyway. So the first step was being there to be like, I can start immediately. I am here, especially when you're doing entry level work and you're like, I'm going to be an editorial assistant for you. Don't worry, I can get your coffee. I'm here.
Yeah.
So I got lucky and I got a job a month and a half after moving there. But my roommate, she was doing a lot of freelancing until August or something of that year. It's tough. It's all about dumb luck. Getting the interview at the right time with the right people. I feel like so much of it is just right place, right time.
Yeah. When you move there, there's already the stress that comes with finding your place or even just moving in and getting to get acquainted with the city on top of also then trying to get job interviews and things like that. To get it in a month and a half, that's pretty awesome.
I got pretty lucky. I got very lucky. I think also I got a job as a copy editor and not a lot of people want to do that. So I think that was helping me as well. A lot of people go down the writer editor track. And I kind of figured copy editor, managing editor was slightly less competitive because I feel like a lot of people don't particularly care about grammar. And that's something that I happen to be good at, for better or for worse, whether I actually like it or not.
Yeah. Was that something that you were even thinking about when you were in school? Or what was the idea in magazine journalism at school? And what did you ultimately think you were going to be doing?
I think I did originally want to be more in the editor space. I think I'm pretty good at macro ideas. And I did work as an editor for the magazine at school. You have to for your capstone before you graduate, which was an interesting experience, but I learned a lot. And I think I thought I was going to be an editor. I think I thought I was going to be like editorial assistant, then writer, then editor, then senior editor, like whatever, editor at large. But I did learn through my first job, I started as a copy editor, but then I slowly started to really be a help to the managing editor. I worked at like a really small publisher that did like single topic special edition magazines. So we worked with like Newsweek to do special edition magazines about like weed in America or like some history anniversary, or when people died, we would drop everything and put out a magazine about a celebrity who had died suddenly, like in a day. Like I still remember when Prince died, TMZ was the first to announce it on a Thursday afternoon. And we were all, we gotta wait for someone else to verify this. It's just TMZ. And then it was 4 p.m. on Thursday. And it was like, all right, we gotta ship it out tomorrow by 5 p.m. We're staying here until 1 in the morning to get all the stories written. All right, let's do it. Wow. So it was things like that. And it was a really small office. It was maybe 20 people who worked there. I became a real help to the managing editor. So I started really seeing kind of what that job actually was. And I learned that I really do love planning. I love organization. I love making sure everything is running on schedule. And that's really a lot of what the managing editor does, putting the puzzle pieces together to make sure that everything is running smoothly and that we can meet all of our deadlines. Through that job, I really learned that, oh, I actually really like doing this. And it's also kind of less stressful because I don't have to always be thinking about ideas and making sure the content is new or fresh, or I don't know. It was stimulating in a different way that stressed me out slightly less, although obviously they're trying to make deadlines is stressful anyway. But doing that on top of trying to generate the content, I found more stressful than just focusing on the deadlines and the nitty gritty of grammar, which is slightly more straightforward.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I think it's something that is good to hear. I think when people and kids are in school and college and they're starting to fantasize about what's possible in their jobs, right? It doesn't have to be one, which you immediately thought it might be, but also being able to be self-aware and recognize where your strengths are and how you can capitalize on that, which is awesome.
Totally.
Well, let's get into it. I want to go back and let's start with that Harry Potter world of yours and the podcast and things like that. How did you get into Harry Potter? Was it the books? Was it the movies? And tell us about why you love Harry Potter and that world so much. We'll get back to the show in just a moment. We're pausing for a brief moment because we want to talk about some ways you can help support the show. The truth is, you're already supporting just by listening. But in season 2, one of our biggest goals is connecting with you. So if you're interested in helping us out, here are some ways you can support. Number 1, rate and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Number 2, follow us on Instagram at MyPop5. And number 3, share your favorite episode or the show with a friend and tag us when you do. Art is at the center of what we do here, and I mentioned we want to connect with you. So if you share the show with a friend and let us know, we're going to pick someone every week and buy you that vinyl, book, or movie that's been sitting on your wish list. Anyway, thank you so much for listening, and we'll get back to the show.
It was the books. I saw the first movie. I was in 4th grade when it came out. I had been given the first book as a gift, but I think I was like, whatever, I'll get to it. I was like 8. I was a little young when the first book came out. So by the time the movies came out, I was much more, I've always been a pretty big reader, but the first movie came out. My dad took my siblings and I to see it. We accidentally went on opening day. We had to wait in a big line and I saw all these kids dressed up like Harry Potter and I was like, what is going on? What movie are we seeing? But then after I saw it, I fell in love and I was like, all right, well, I got to check out what these books are about. And I think at that point, just the first 4 were out and I zoomed through them and fell in love with the world. I was very much a book person when it came to Harry Potter, but it was all coming out at once. I was very much the right age while everything was coming out. I waited for books. I suffered the long hiatus between book 4 and 5, and I went to every movie when it came out at midnight. I only did 1 midnight book premiere for the last book, but I was in it. I definitely would say I'm probably more of a book fan than a movie fan. I see them as 2 separate entities.
Sure.
They're like kind of two separate universes to me.
Yeah. And so was there initial disappointment at all in terms of you zoomed through the first 4 books and then the movies started trickling out after the fact? Was there disappointment? I know that can tend to be the case with books to movies. Or you mentioned they're two separate universes and you were kind of willing to accept them as two separate things.
I think the first 2 movies were pretty true to the books. They just like left things out because the books are long.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the 3rd movie was really the turning point when I started seeing them as 2 separate things.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was in 7th grade when the 3rd movie came out. I think when I first saw it, I was like, what the heck? So many things changed. This isn't like the book at all. They're not even wearing their uniforms anymore. They left out so much. But now looking back, I think the 3rd movie is my favorite movie. I mean, Alfonso Cuarón does an amazing job. I think that is the movie that is the turning point of, okay, we're taking liberties with these movies now. Obviously, we can't fit everything in, so let's just do whatever the heck we want. And I think that movie kind of forced me to like learn how to separate. You can't fit everything in a book into a movie. That's impossible. And especially if every movie has a different director every couple of movies. So at first, I was very protective over the material. And then I was like, no, this is unrealistic. Let's just enjoy the movies for what they are and just see how they interpret the material.
Yeah.
But I know there are a lot of book purists out there where they can't deal with the adaptation. Fails.
Sure. At that age that you're referencing, I think a lot of people gravitate towards something and you're kind of finding who you are and your own personality at that time. Having also grown up with siblings, I also know that there's a drive to want to find something that's mine, or at least that was the case for me, right? You mentioned you saw the first movie with both of your siblings. Was Harry Potter something that could be just Holland's, or did you and your siblings all love it? Or what was that experience like?
I was the only one who read the books as they were coming out. I think it was very much a Holland thing, but we all saw the movies together. So every time we went to the movies after the movie, and even my dad would usually take us and it would be like, all right, Holland, I'm confused about this one part. Can you explain this to me? You're like the Harry Potter Bible. I need help. They consumed the movies, and we have some of the video games for GameCube that we would play. I think we had the PC game too for the first one, but they did not read the books until much later. So it was very much a Holland thing. I also was very much on the forums. I was on MuggleNet wearing my tinfoil hat and theorizing between every book. I like bought unauthorized books between book releases of just people theorizing what is going to happen. Like, how will Harry Potter end? I think I have 2 of them in my apartment in Brooklyn right now. And I would like write notes in the margins. And I remember there was a fill-in page in one for like, what's going to happen in the last Harry Potter book? And I would like write down theories I saw on forums. And I remember there was one that was like, Snape is in love with Lily. I don't know. That was a weird one that I read somewhere and it ended up being true. Spoiler alert. Sorry for Harry Potter. I was in it. And then even after the whole phenomenon, the final book came out in 2007. The final movie came out in 2011. That was kind of the end of the peak of Harry Potter's everywhere. And actually, when I was living in LA, I started getting back into it through this Harry Potter reread podcast that MuggleNet put out. And I became very active on the forums of that podcast. I tend to be a very active participant of fandom, and I go very hard. So I would write my opinions and theories in the forum of this podcast, and sometimes they would read it on the podcast. And I was like, yes, my thoughts got through and other people can hear them. Yeah, filling in a lot of the blanks. And Harry Potter is such a fantastical world, but it also, there are so many creative people who have spun it out into fan fiction or just headcanon of filling in where she who must not be named did not explain things. And that is another big reason why I was such a big fan, was just because the fandom was also so vast. People who love Harry Potter love talking about it at wit's end. I don't know. I loved it so much.
Holland, I'm curious, I know that, when you're kind of waiting for a series and when you're invested in it that way, maybe there is a point where, you are in between all these releases theorizing. Was there any disappointment? Were you satisfied with how it ended, or was it maybe something that you had to grow to accept?
I don't think I was ever disappointed. I guess maybe like the one thing I remember being a really big debate was whether Dumbledore actually died or not in the sixth book. Spoiler alert. I mean, I don't know. Spoiler for all of Harry Potter if you're listening to this. It ended like 14 years ago. But I remember there was a website called dumbledoresnotdead.com that came out like after the sixth book came out. And I think I remember really wanting to believe that theory just because when a beloved character dies, you're in denial and you want to cling to like hope that they'll come back. But I don't think I was ever disappointed with how things actually worked out. I was pretty good at just accepting whatever happened and however it came. And I also read that last book so fast. I remember it came out and I was helping a friend. She was in Seussical. I was like visiting a friend. She was in Seussical, the musical, and I helped run the concession stand. And me and this other girl would read Harry Potter while the play was on obsessively because it had just come out. And I remember one matinee, one of the people were like, hey, it's kind of a light crowd today. Could you guys go in and like clap really loudly when the songs end? And we were like, in a dark theater? Are you kidding me? We need to read our Harry Potter. So we like sat at the back of the auditorium with the door cracked open so we could still read. And then whenever something ended, we were like, yay, yeah, sure, great. Okay, back to the book.
Oh, that's so hilarious.
But yeah, that's a really good question. But I don't remember ever being disappointed or wishing that a theory that I had read was actually true. The ones I really remember were just the ones that came out before the last book. I remember a lot of them coming true from what I had read and be like, oh my God, I can't believe that. R.A.B. being Regulus Black. The note in the locket was written by Sirius Black's brother. Like I remember reading a whole theory that basically broke down how it actually went down and how Preacher the house elf actually helped him get the locket out of the cave and the whole thing. And then I remember reading the book and being like, I read this theory on a forum a year ago and it was true. I think I came across a lot more of that than being like, oh no, like this didn't happen. Dang it. J.K. Rowling, why didn't you know to write this theory that I read on good MuggleNet forum?
Yeah. That's always what's interesting about fandoms because they're so passionate. I think that's why a lot of people don't like fandoms, either being a part of them or just an observer of them, is because expectations ruin things for them. I saw that all the time with Harry Potter's one of them, all the recent Star Wars things that came out.
Oh my gosh.
My roommate is an obsessed Star Wars fan. He was like, going over and over about how he wanted these things to end. And I'm like, just go in and take it for what it is, because you're just going to be so upset if what you want to happen doesn't happen.
Totally.
It was awesome to hear you say, as much as I geeked out about it and was curious, I was also willing to just accept the story for what it was. And I think that's a very healthy relationship with fandom.
I know. I'm kind of proud of like my 15-year-old self reading Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows and being like, I'm just going to take it as it comes.
Yeah. But I mean, that also could be something to where as an author, they did a good job of understanding how the fans responded to the characters and then being able to drive a story that would let everyone or the majority of people feel mostly satisfied.
Yeah, weirdly enough, I think she was pretty grounded and kind of knew what she wanted to do with the story and with the characters and didn't really let public opinion affect the writing as the books came out. Social media really was not what it was. Mm-hmm. It's not what it is now. There was no Twitter. There was barely YouTube. Facebook was like MySpace. And it was just like internet forums that you could either interact with or not interact with. I don't think there was as much opinions about the material in your face, whether you wanted it to be or not. Mm-hmm. So I think that was a benefit. And I think once social media really kicked up, that is where she started getting in a lot more trouble and started being like, by the way, Dumbledore is gay. She started adding way more to the canon when it was like, what are you doing? Stop talking, stop opening your mouth. I mean, I know some people liked knowing more about the world, but it started to seem like once it was in her face all the time, she felt the need to answer all the questions that really didn't need answering. And we all know that she's kind of gotten herself in even more hot water via social media as of late.
We've had these conversations, especially on the show with a lot of musicians and actors and stuff having problematic pasts and presents.
Yeah.
Has that affected your relationship with the art in general, or kind of what is your viewpoint on separating art from artists and things like that?
Yeah, it was definitely really difficult to digest the things that she was saying about trans people and the weird pseudoscience opinion. She was using feminism as a shield to preach this weird disinformation. Actually, ContraPoints on YouTube did a really good video about the whole J.K. Rowling transphobia turf nonsense that I would recommend. And especially because at the time I was working at Scholastic, which is the American publisher of Harry Potter. So like as all of this stuff was coming out, I was like, this is just such a huge conflict of interest because not only am I a fan of Harry Potter, I also work for a company that publishes it. I don't think I can financially feed into the Harry Potter machine anymore. Not that my one purchase of things is going to make a huge difference, but just ethically and morally, I can't feed into the beast anymore just because I do not support her and her views. And she's still writing things too. I didn't ever work on any of her titles, but it was also weird to be working at Scholastic and being like, well, she still has a new book that she's working on. I'm like, why? She still has enough of a fan base. It's never going to really go away. And there are always going to be people who it doesn't really matter what she says online. And she's always going to be a big moneymaker for this big corporation that I used to work for. So it was a really weird thing to grapple with. And in terms of actually consuming the books and movies, I definitely feel a lot weirder about it now. But I think a big thing about what I loved about Harry Potter was what it inspired in other people and kind of the community. This is still a thing that so many people love. It's also just so weird. Basically, the thesis statement of Harry Potter is love is the most powerful magic of all. And her views kind of seem to be in contrast with that. The answer is I'm still kind of grappling with it. I haven't gone back and reread any of the books or watched any of the movies kind of since it's all happened. But it is still a really important piece of media that has been in my life. I was like the Harry Potter girl. I have won like multiple pub trivia quizzes of Harry Potter basically by myself. And that was my thing. And I think it really inspired, or I guess it maybe not inspired a love of reading, but just kind of reinforced my love for reading and storytelling, critical thinking, and kind of reading analytically, because I would take something away differently from every reread that I had, and being able to discuss it with other people and reinterpret the story in different ways that I hadn't seen before. It plays such a huge importance in my life in terms of developing those types of skills and relationships with other people. So it's still something that I kind of struggle with. Yeah. And I'm still kind of learning how to redefine my relationship with the books and the movies.
Yeah. It's becoming more and more commonplace, I think, with a lot of stuff, right? And, it's not just Harry Potter. There's, dozens and dozens of musical artists and directors and artists. And it's like, are you not able to watch anything that Harvey Weinstein's production company ever produced?
Right.
There's like a lot of these things where, there's a lot of atrocious human beings out there. But if you have a relationship with something like Harry Potter, your relationship can almost live in a silo with that. But you're right. There's things tied to it ethically of me watching this is financing something for them, right?
Right.
I had this conversation recently because just for some background, I had never seen Harry Potter. When I grew up, there was dumb rumors that went around when I was a kid. My mother was like very religious at the time. And it was just like, everything in Harry Potter is witchcraft and the characters are named after demons. There was some Facebook-like rumor that was going out. And so when the first few movies came out or books, my mom was like, oh yeah, you guys can't watch that. And then by the time my mom was like, okay, I was dumb, You can watch it if you want. I had missed the train, you know, it was just kind of
Right.
like, there's already movie 7 coming out. When I started talking about, oh, I'm watching these movies with some of my friends, kind of get caught up for our conversation here today. The way I felt a little bit better about the movies and things like that is they're not the only person who worked on that project.
Exactly.
Right? Especially in movie production. You know, hundreds of other people who this is their piece of work too. Yes, there is one person who was involved, the creator, but one person who has opinions that are, you know, that I don't align with. But there are also so many other probably beautiful humans who've done nothing wrong that worked really hard on that project. I'm admiring the art and all the work that went into it. So that's kind of what made me feel better about it, you know? So it's tough. And I don't think there's an easy answer.
Definitely. That is a good way to look at it.
So you mentioned it already, but what house are you in?
Well, Pottermore sorted me into Gryffindor. So that is what I aligned myself with.
Okay. I took it before we joined here and
oh my God, amazing.
I was a Huffle.
Hufflepuff?
All Hufflepuff. Right. Yep. I still don't know enough about it to know how I feel about that. But now I know when people ask me that question, I have that.
I think Hufflepuff means you're very kind, you're hardworking, you're very loyal. Those are like the traits that I think are usually associated with Hufflepuffs. Not bad traits to be associated with.
Well, let's go ahead and move on, Holland. I want to make sure we get to these other things here. Let's go ahead and move into the music world a little bit and talk about the untitled Blink-182 record. How did you get into that record and why did you put it here on your Pop 5?
So this record came out when I was in 6th grade, and my best friend really liked it and told me that I needed to listen to it. So it was actually the first full Blink-182 album that I had ever really listened to front to back. Obviously, I knew all the small things. That was probably it at that point. And I fell in love with it. And from there, it kind of jumped off my obsession with Blink-182. I don't half-ass the things that I like, so I had to go back and deep dive all their albums. I asked for the rest of their albums for Christmas and birthdays and totally fell in love with them. And they were my first concert. And then they broke up and it was kind of, or it went on indefinite hiatus.
Yeah.
But I could not let go. So they broke up, I think, in 2004. Mm-hmm. But I was still deep in it. And I spent the rest of middle school still just falling deeper in love with them, even though I knew that they were on an indefinite hiatus, quote unquote. But like, broken up for all intents and purposes. But yeah, that Blink-182 Untitled record, I think is still my favorite one. It might be just because it was the first one and it was my gateway into Blink-182. But I don't know. I still stand by it. I think it's an incredible record. All the songs flow into one another. It's very cohesive. It's very well thought out. It's complete to me. That's what I think.
Yeah, and it's intentional, right? In terms of when they talk about how they worked on that record, it was the first one after a little break that they had even within their first few records that they decided, hey, we want to do something different. You know, a lot of the members even said they approached it saying, hey, this may not even be the Blink-182 project. We're going to come together and just make something and don't put pressure on ourselves that this has to be the next Blink-182 record. And it was their most experimental to date. And you're right, the cohesion from track to track, it was very intentional to say, we want this one to end and flow into this one. The record for them that feels the most like an arc and a story from beginning to end. Yeah, it's so great. Even just the start of it, I think Feeling This has always been one of my favorite songs, you know, just
love it.
It's on my Get Hyped playlist, you know. No, I don't have an actual Get Hyped playlist, but if I did, it would be on there, just the energy. And then Miss You is their biggest song ever, you know?
Yeah.
So there's just so many moments on that record that are just incredible. You mentioned they were your first concert and you deep dived into them and their music. Is this something you still gravitate to and still listen to them and still feel as passionately for?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, yeah, this is definitely a comfort album. I have a couple of them where if I am feeling very stressed out or just need to not think about anything, this is definitely one that I will throw on and it soothes me because I love it so much. And yeah, and just Blink-182 in general just reminds me of a time when I think It was maybe one of the first times that I got into music. They were probably my first favorite band that wasn't the Backstreet Boys when I was 6 or something, or the Spice Girls, which those are also great first favorite bands. But I think the first favorite band where I was very consciously choosing, like, I am aligning myself with you and I enjoy and appreciate all of the stuff that you produce for the most part. Yeah, I think it was one of the seeds that was just like, you are my thing now.
Yeah. You and I are pretty close in age, and I'm curious because as I was listening back to this record, a bunch of these things were flashing back to me about where they were in the pop culture space. Their music was kind of in everything, and it flashed me back to this movie that came out. It was kind of what you would imagine a Disney Channel movie would be, but I think it actually went to theaters, called Clock Stoppers. I don't know if you remember that movie.
Oh my gosh, yes. Jesse Bradford.
Yes. I think it was All the Small Things, or one of them was in that trailer for that song, and I remember being obsessed with that movie because they were just in the pop culture sphere in movies and all over the place. Do you think that contributed to your love for them, or do you think that was separate?
I don't think so, because when all of that stuff was happening, they really weren't on my radar. They were in American Pie, and I guess their music was used in a lot of different forms of media. And that was kind of stuff that I discovered as I was getting into them and being like, oh, wow, they are a big deal. I don't think I really realized how big of a deal they were when I was getting into them. I don't know why. I truly just had no idea what their impact was at that point in 2003. When I kind of went back and deep dove and saw how saturated they were, I guess, in the culture, it impressed me and then kind of justified my love for them. I was like, see, they are amazing. Everybody else thinks so too. Yeah. I'm the opposite of, I knew them before they were cool. I was like, wait, other people love them? Great. Awesome. I love it.
Yeah.
Now I can talk about them with even more people. Yeah. I'm a total pop music person, which I think is evident with other things on my list too. Yeah, I don't think that had an influence on why I fell for them so hard. I think I just genuinely, I went in so cold turkey, I guess. Somehow I had avoided it, that the more I learned about them, the more I loved them and wanted to know even more and wanted to just be immersed in all things Blink-182.
For myself, I have also grown to love them more as an adult. When I first discovered them, I had that relationship with them like Clock Stoppers. I'm like, I love All the Small Things and a few of these songs that I really love. But I had a lot of bitterness towards them just because I'm a drummer, right? And I don't know how many times people would come up to me and be like, can you play this thing that Travis Barker did? Or don't you think Travis Barker is the best drummer in the whole world? And he is a phenomenal drummer. I'm not even going to dispute that. But at the time, that's all I was hearing. Anyone knew I played drums. It was a Travis Barker question that followed up with it. So I have some bitterness towards the band. But now as an adult, after that's kind of gone away, I just absolutely think they were so influential to, music and pop culture in general. And even still so, Travis Barker is still showing up in, pop culture news and all the things that he's doing. It's
dating
crazy.
A Kardashian, which I did not expect to happen.
Yeah. And then the crazy plane crash incident
too. My gosh.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, what sparked their reunion in 2009. I know that Mark and Travis and Tom had a very contentious relationship, which is why they separated. And I think that plane crash was a really sobering moment that was like, let's cut the bullshit and I still care about you as a person and let's reconnect. But yeah, that was insane. Wasn't it recently he finally went on a plane for the first time since the plane crash or something, which is insane. And Mark just announced that he had cancer, which was also a really scary kind of, oh my gosh, the celebrities that I love are fallible. It's like, oh, okay, wow, this is a scary moment. But I think he's done with chemo. So I think he's doing really well right now, which was happy for me to see.
Yeah, it's reaffirming that, we are all mortal in a lot of ways. Like, sometimes even just seeing how much people have aged. Sometimes Zach Braff, I saw a picture of recently, and I loved Scrubs so much that I'm like, oh my gosh, he's looking older, and it's coming for all of us.
I know.
Let's talk about Degrassi, The Next Generation.
Degrassi.
You had an entire podcast about it. It's how I found and heard about you. Let's talk about Degrassi, why you loved it, and obviously how it impacted you.
Well, I think the first episode of Degrassi I ever saw was actually a season 2 episode. It was when Ashley was all goth, but she was trying to date Jimmy again. It was when they had their brief reconnection. Even without any context, it starts off like, oh, there's this goth girl. She's clearly been through some changes, but her old boyfriend still likes her, but she's changed so much since they first dated. And the whole episode goes through a whole arc, and by the end of it, they're broken up for good. And I found it so engaging that I was like, what is this show? I need to know everything about it. I need to go back and watch it from the beginning. And from there, I just fell in love. Again, I became a huge Degrassi fan. I think it came out on Fridays. I watched it every Friday night when it came out. I made sure I recorded it on my TiVo. Actually, at the time, my dad had cable, but my mom did not have TV. So whenever I was at my mom's house, I would either go over to my dad's on Fridays to be like, I need to watch my show, or I would have to record it and wait very impatiently until I got back to his house to be able to watch it. And I actually remember one time I got grounded and I wasn't allowed to watch TV, which was fine if I was at my mom's house. My parents lived in the same neighborhood, and I remember the Time Stand Still episode was coming out, but I was grounded, and I snuck over to my dad's house so I could watch it live. I think he was out of town or something, and I remember being glued to the screen, but also kind of anxious that I was going to get caught watching TV when I wasn't supposed to, but that put on top of a very intense episode of television.
Yeah.
It made the experience very anxiety ridden.
Yeah. So for the audience, Time Stands Still. It's actually a good connection because that was the first episode I ever saw of Degrassi.
Wow.
People, if you're not a Degrassi fan, you'll probably have seen clips of this. It's the episode where there's a school shooting and Drake, aka Jimmy from the show, is, a victim of that shooting, and it is jarring. So people always ask me since I started the show, Ryan, you're asking people what their pop 5 is. What's yours? Forever I've said, I don't know that I'll ever have one. I think it would be a funny joke to say, oh, that's on my pop 5. That's on my pop 5,
every episode.
Yeah, everyone's like, he has a list of 150 things, But Degrassi probably realistically would be on mine. That was the first episode I saw. I was at a friend's house and he was like, I need to catch this new episode of Degrassi. Will you watch it with me? And then that episode is just so jarring that I was like, oh my gosh, I need to watch more of this for sure.
Yeah, that's a really intense place to start. It goes there, man.
It's similar in the sense that I also am someone who just dives deep in. And so after the episode ended, I needed to know more. I was like, okay, so who was that girl and why was this important? Then he starts telling me all the background. And back then, you couldn't just go on YouTube and watch all the episodes. So then I had to wait for the summer when the N would do the every episode ever marathons. And I would try to watch as many as I could. But the reason I always say that Degrassi would probably be on my pop 5 is because it tackles so many things that I think were taboo in my household specifically. And it was the first time I started shaping my own opinions about the world in some ways. I grew up in a pretty Christian conservative household. There was moments where Paige and Alex relationship, they're kissing on screen. And my mom makes a comment like, ugh, or something like that. And it's like, turn that off. You can't be watching this anymore. I started to question with myself, like, wait, why isn't this okay? There were aspects of the show where I started to really form my own opinions and become who I am as a person just through watching these characters on the show.
It tackles so many common issues that come up for kids in middle school and high school, and it's famous for doing that. Obviously, it's not realistic in the sense that all of these things are happening to the same 10 people, but it just does a really good job of trying to do their best to show these things accurately and responsibly at the same time, which I think is really important for kids who are consuming this media. So often, like so many shows, especially when this was coming out, all the teen dramas that were coming out were so outlandish and so unrealistic, like the OC and like One Tree Hill and all of these really melodramatic TV shows, which I also loved. Like, I'm not knocking on them.
Yeah.
It was probably one of the first shows that I could relate to in my own life and see myself in certain aspects of the show and certain characters, especially for the fact that they cast age-appropriate actors in the roles. All of the people on screen were kids, and you were seeing them grow up before you, just like you were.
Mhm.
And obviously we can go back to early seasons and be like, that maybe isn't the most politically correct way that we could have handled this. But at the time, it was breaking down barriers, and it continued to do that from start to finish. And I know that's how the show started back in the 80s too. It was full on after school special, but also didn't shy away from tough topics. It was educational, but in a very entertaining way.
Yeah, no, totally. I know that back when you were in the thick of it, you actually had a falling out point, and you talk about that on your show. So tell me, one, how did you get involved meeting Kelsey and deciding to start the show? And then two, what your relationship was with continuing and finishing the show after not living through it in the moment?
Yeah, Kelsey and I met at work at the job where we were making single topic, single edition magazines. I think one day when we were out for drinks with work people, she saw that I had a Harry Potter keychain on my keys and was like, hey, I like Harry Potter too. And basically it was like, I'm going to make you my friend now, which is how I make a lot of my friends because I'm generally a pretty shy person. So she's like, we're going to be friends now. And I was like, great, I'm fine with that. I'm very fine with that. Great, let's be friends. And we also learned that we were members of the same gym. So we started going to the gym after work together sometimes. I went to her birthday party and then we saw Crimson Peak in theaters, and that's what cemented our friendship. But all along the way, we were going to the gym together. And I remember one day we were at the gym on the ellipticals, not really actually working very hard and just talking to each other. And the conversation that you have with a lot of friends, which is like, we should start a podcast. Because I don't know, we just would always talk about bullshit that we liked because we have a lot of overlapping interests and we love to talk about it. We were brainstorming like, well, what could we do a podcast about? I don't think we were seriously considering it in the moment. Somebody said Degrassi and we were both like, oh my God, yes, that would be so good. There's so many episodes too, and it kind of just stuck with us. And then we followed up on it and we were like, well, what would it look like if we did a podcast? What's the equipment? What can we do? Got mics, and I went over to her house one day and we watched the first episode and we recorded the podcast and we were like, all right, let's do it. We're doing it. Just kind of came together just because we followed up on a silly idea we had while talking on the ellipticals. And then both of us had only watched up until the original cast members started to kind of peel off and leave. We were really in it when we were truly rewatching and remembering what it was like to watch them originally and then to revisit, which is kind of a theme with my current podcast. Once we started getting into the new stuff, it was an adjustment. And at first it was like, wow, this is all brand new information. But I think we also really went hard in the beginning. We did 2 episodes a week for like the first, I don't even know how long. They were 20-minute episodes and we'd watch 2 episodes and then record 2 episodes in one day. And then we'd release 2 episodes a week. We were churning them out because we were like, there are so many episodes. We got to get through it somehow. We're not doing this for like 10 years. We still did it for 5. But like at some point, the episodes became 40 minutes. And then we were like, this is not sustainable. We're doing it once a week. Our lives also just got busier. We started the show when we were 23. I think 24. I don't know. We were young and didn't have as many obligations. This was our hobby. I mean, it was still a hobby, but it did kind of become more work towards the end when we were trying to fit it in between other life things. It was just so exciting at the beginning. And we also just didn't have that much else going on. It was like, yeah, we can do 2 episodes in a day. And I'll go over to your house on Sunday and spend all day there doing Degrassi things. Yeah, I can totally do that. The combination of just life happening and getting to longer episodes and then getting to episodes where we were unfamiliar with the characters kind of all culminated in a slump. Also, season 11 is trash. I'm sorry. That is the most boring season of television that show ever produced. And I'm not afraid to say it. We've said it so many times on the show. They all kind of culminated in the season 11 moment that we were like, oh my God. I think when we were watching that that season, we were like, we're only making it to season 14. We're not doing next class. We can't do this anymore. But then it got more exciting and we got invested again. And then from there, it kind of came in waves where it was like, I'm excited when storylines got more exciting. But then when they were just kind of a little more blah, it felt more like an obligation. When we finally finished next class, it was like, okay, we can take a break. But I'm happy that we made it to the end.
Yes.
It's on my list in large part because of the podcast. It reignited my love for the show, I guess, for the first 7 seasons of it. It was really amazing to revisit and really recognize how important the show was to me and realizing the long-lasting effects the show has actually had on me and seeing what lessons it actually did teach me as a preteen and teenager. Also, the show has been such a big part of my adult life now because of the podcast. It basically solidified my friendship with Kelsey, who is one of my best friends of all time. I'm not sure we would be as close if it had not been for the podcast. It gave us an excuse to see each other at least once a week, and to be able to create something with your friend for 5 years is a really cool thing, because half of every podcast is us just going on tangents and talking about bullshit. It's also kind of allowed us to really get to know each other a lot better. It was a unique way to grow a friendship. For that, I will always have a very special place in my heart for Degrassi.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. So much about this show is so important. It's so hard for me because I think there are so many beautiful elements about the show that we've kind of touched on already. Production value wise, if I were to say, Daniel, please go watch all of Degrassi, because I think there are so many moments like there's also, I'm like, I can't put you through that, you know, like I recognize it's not the highest of quality of things, you know, especially in the earlier episodes. And you already mentioned season 11. You have to already have a love to be able to get through it. But I'm like, I wish other people had this love, because there are so many beautiful things about it. And there's so many storylines. You can go through so many characters and be like, I want to talk for an hour about what happened with Craig or with Zig or whoever, you know, all these various different characters. But
or like Spinner, like, like arc of all arcs, like, yeah, Maya
and Claire also have like these crazy like situations. So it's like there's so many cool characters and stories in that show, and I would love people to have experienced it, but I also can't like knowingly recommend go spend what was 5 years of your life, you know, forever getting caught up on these shows. One thing I will say in defense of season 11 a little bit, I don't necessarily think it was a great season, right? What I will say is when I was listening back to you and Kelsey talk about it, was you guys were going week to week watching it. But when it was released at that time, it was like telenovela style. So you were getting like an episode every day. And like,
oh my gosh.
And then like Fridays, what they would do is they'd show all 5 episodes in tandem. So like the way they wrote it was like a soap opera. So that way you can experience like everything in like one story. So stories were drawn out too long to be able to fit like the whole week narrative as opposed to week over week. So like when you're taking a pause, you're not seeing the full story for 5 weeks in terms of if you were only watching one a week. So that was one thing where I was like, yes, at face value, this one episode was terrible, but that's because like it's fitting this like larger like 5.
It's like episode 2 out of 5. Like, okay, yes. That makes so much more sense.
Yeah. But anyway, it's also very bad. There are also some really bad storylines there, but that's the one small defense I would have for that. But what's interesting, and I wanted to kind of tell you, like one of the reasons I, loved yours and Kelsey's show was the stuff that was outside of Degrassi as well. The end segment that you guys did in terms of just recommending things is what inspired the show for a lot of reasons for me. Was like you guys talking about, cool, here's what I'm into at the moment, and hearing you guys geek out about this stuff. That was part of me of like, I would love to know what everyone is geeking out about, because I love those recommendations and like knowing what is driving people and learning more about you and Kelsey through the stuff you guys talked about, whether it was the podcasts or books or movies or music that you guys were into. It was like exciting for me. So it was a huge inspiration for kind of what me and Daniel are doing here today. And so thank you for one. Because it's like, I don't know that I would have done this without like hearing what you guys do and like realizing, oh yeah, podcasts as something to do is possible. And then like even just the idea of it came from, you guys in some aspects as well. But I say this all to say, One of my favorite things to observe was also the next thing here on your list was I watched your love for BTS develop from the first time where you were like, yeah, I heard this new band, BTS. And then it became an obsession and Holland was part of the BTS army by the end of the show. So yeah, thank you again.
So moving back a little bit, it's so amazing to hear that my podcast helped inspire this podcast. So that is very humbling and I love that so much. I also want to know what everybody else's pop 5 are. Also, trying to pick just 5 things to do this show was so difficult. I have such a long list and I was like going back and forth and trying to like, I don't know. But it's probably all things that I've talked about on my Degrassi podcast at one point or another anyway. So yeah, yes, BTS army. Yeah, you can definitely track my fandom on that show. That's so funny to think about. But yeah, at my old job where we worked on magazines, we were told that we were going to do a BTS magazine in like spring of 2018. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like vaguely familiar of who they were. I knew it was like a K-pop band. I knew there were like a lot of boys in it. And that was pretty much all I knew. So, and at the time I was still copy editing like every story that we worked on. So I had to like read each story like multiple times. So I was like, all right, I gotta do some research. I gotta like familiarize myself with these boys and see what's going on. First music video I ever watched was DNA by BTS, which I still recommend that as like a jumping off point because I think it's a pretty palatable, it's a very like, this is what K-pop is song, but also like, this is what K-pop is music video. Cause it's like bright colors, like cute boys, like lots of different hair colors and like a fun poppy song. This is probably what you think K-pop is. So that was like the first music video that I watched. And I was like, oh, that was cool. And then I like uttered the famous last words of every single K-pop stan, which is, all right, well, let me just learn their names. So from there, you like watch like there are like these videos on YouTube that are like a guide to BTS or an unhelpful guide to BTS that like goes through each member and like shows like clips of everybody, kind of like displaying their personalities from different variety and reality shows that they've been on. And then from there, you're like, oh, well, that clip was funny. Like, where can I find the full thing? And then like you go down the rabbit hole and you're like immersed in the world. And okay, I stand these men now and there's no turning back. And I like want to buy all their albums. And I love it so much. It's such a vibrant and exciting world.
Yeah. Do you think you mentioned a bit ago you grew up, and we both grew up in the boy band world with, NSYNC and Backstreet Boys and a love for them. Do you think that played into the palatability of them now, or is it separate, a different love, it's unique?
I think that definitely played into part. Like I've always been a boy band person, or any girl band or boy band. Like I loved Spice Girls. I was a Backstreet Boys girl, but like also was fine with NSYNC. I just liked Backstreet Boys better.
Same.
And unfortunately, my favorite member was Brian, but he has also since been outed as a very problematic person. So I've kind of defaulted to my number 2, and Kevin is my man now. And like I also like had a brief One Direction fascination when that was happening, like very briefly. I've always been a fan of the boy band. Also, actually, one of my favorite bands in high school was this British rock band called McFly, and I like really got into them too. They probably also could have been on this list, but they didn't make the cut, sorry. But that's always kind of been in the background, and that's probably what helped me like initially get into them, being like, well, I don't know, I like boy bands, like let's see what's going on. And then soon learned K-pop is much different than like kind of herky-jerky, like whatever dance moves that like Backstreet Boys were doing. And I think K-pop is like so much about like the complete performance package where like they're singing or rapping and dancing at the same time, but also like the production values of their music videos are like incredible. The production values of their stage performances are also like very grand and meticulously planned out, like depending on like what level you are within the industry. And it's not just like one thing that you're good at. They like perfect like every aspect of the performance, even aesthetically. Like every time they release new music, it's like a brand new concept that is like fully realized. Like every era is like very distinct and well thought out and planned out. And it's just like so impressive. It keeps you coming back for more because you're like, all right, well, what are they going to do next? And also, I genuinely enjoy the music too. There's like so much of a variety in the music, and especially BTS alone has like so much diversity in the type of music that they do make, but also like across K-pop in general. Like there are so many different groups doing things around the same level, but in their own way. And it's really interesting to see like how each band makes their mark on the industry and like kind of comes out as like their own like thing. And yeah, I don't know. I love it. It's just pure entertainment.
Yeah. The biggest thing for me that I was struck by was the production value, like you mentioned, both from music videos and the stage performances. Like there's like stuff that I'm like the Taylor Swift like production value level things in their shows where they're flying through the air on strings and stuff like that. And I'm like, what is this? Like Backstreet Boys would never, you know?
I know.
Yeah, it was just like crazy just how, one, you could tell how important it is to their culture and their home fan base, which is why they can fund something like this heavily, but also just like how much care is put into every tiny detail, every movement, every pose, like just the way they're standing. And sometimes it's like, it's crazy cool to see. You mentioned Kevin being your de facto new Backstreet Boys favorite, but do you have a favorite member of BTS or favorite members? I know there's more to kind of go through.
I do. My bias, which is the term in K-pop of BTS, is Suga or Yoongi.
Nice. What's the reasoning?
I don't know. I think I relate to his personality a lot. He's like kind of quieter, a little more like low key, but like very hardworking. And he's also a really awesome like producer and produces a lot of his own music in addition to BTS's music. And I appreciate like that kind of work ethic. And I enjoy the music that he makes. His rapping is pretty impressive, and I enjoy like the way that he raps. So yeah, I think that's why he's my favorite. But I love them all. I'm not a solo stan, so.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's so cool that, you know, people when they hear boy band might also just think of one specific style, but like the fact that BTS combines not only like the K-pop aesthetic, but also just like hip hop and rap elements into what's happening, you know, like they're almost closer to people like Post Malone than they would be Backstreet Boys, you know, like just in terms of like a musical elements. But and then even they have the hits, like Dynamite is a pop hit. So like they kind of can branch through a bunch of different genres and do them all very well, which is also surprising and exciting. Well, awesome. I want to get you out of here. We have one last one to cover here, Holland. Sorry for going over, but Teen Vogue, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the magazine and kind of what you love in your intro to Teen Vogue.
Yeah, so I chose Teen Vogue. I was big on like teen magazines in general when I was like a tween teen. And obviously I loved them so much that I like chose to study them in college and wanted to work in that industry initially before pivoting to more like book publishing. I think Teen Vogue was like one of the first magazines I like had a subscription to. It felt more like sophisticated than like 17 or like Cosmo Girl or Elle Girl, like kind of the other like teen magazines that it was
J14
competing against. Yeah, I was never like a J14, Tiger Beat. I never really read those ones. Or actually, I loved getting the American Girl magazine too, but that's definitely more like that's like tween. Like if you still have dolls and stuff. Yeah, Teen Vogue was like, it felt like a step up. Like it felt much more editorial, and it like didn't treat its readers like children. I think it kind of met them where they were, really taught them about like the fashion industry, and it was kind of like a nice intro and learning how to think critically about fashion. And also just, it was probably the first time I was really reading like longer like profiles in a magazine and kind of learning what like the magazine writing style was. And I don't know, I consumed like every issue that came to me every single month, and it really solidified my love for magazines. I don't know. I still like have a very vivid memory of like getting like a Teen Vogue with Emma Watson on the cover and being like, this is my favorite thing ever. Like, yeah, just the like sense memory of like getting the magazine in the mail and like being excited to just dive into it.
I grew up kind of relatively poor. I say that because like I remember wanting not necessarily Teen Vogue, but just the teen magazine industry was like so huge. You're at the grocery store and like I was obsessed. Like we've talked about it before. I think I'm similar in that if you love something, you just want to know everything about it. And so even if it was like Disney Channel shows or Lizzie McGuire or whatever that I was into at the time, standing at checkout and seeing that there's a magazine there that has Hilary Duff on the cover as well as Zac Efron or whatever the case is that's going on at the time, I'm like, I want it. I need to know what's happened. So I didn't get to kind of dive in, but when you kind of put this on here, it like just transported me back to that time of like, it was the biggest thing. Like you still see it with like People magazine and stuff like that today, like celebrity gossip, but it's not the same as what it was back then. And just how, you know, big it was. One thing that I also liked while kind of researching Teen Vogue in general is that I was reading a lot of people's like perception of like the subject matter, kind of like you mentioned, it was less gossip and less of here's how to find a prom date and more of like, let's choose your prom color palette, you know, like something that was more fashion and beauty and less like gossip or, you know, advice and things like that. And so, yeah, it was cool to be transported back in time to that space, but it also made me sad just thinking of the decline in print journalism and magazines in general.
I know. I'm sad about that every day. I know. It's so different now. Like the aughts, I think, were like such a big boom in like the amount of magazines that were available to you. It was a big reason why I wanted to go into the industry. And I loved like the medium of magazines so much because they came out monthly for the most part, at least the ones that I was really focusing on. It really felt like planning and care and intention, as we were talking about earlier, like really went into every issue. Like it wasn't where you went for breaking news, but it's kind of where you went to maybe like mull over topics more and to kind of explore things further or to deep dive into subjects. So it's really sad to see now that is just so not how we consume media anymore. Like now it's so like clickbait, just give me the information. Like we're so overwhelmed with information now that we don't really take the time to sit down and like read magazines anymore. And like I'm guilty of that too. I can't have magazine subscriptions anymore because I'll get them and they'll just sit in my kitchen and I don't pick them up because I'm like too busy doing other things, or I tell myself I'm too busy doing other things. There was a time where I got like 4 different magazines delivered to me every month, and I would pore over them and like be excited to see like what was coming up. And also like having kind of worked adjacent to the industry and like knowing so many people who work in the magazine industry was another kind of like seeing behind the curtain and kind of realizing the bad aspects of it and kind of, especially like in tandem with the industry really going through a lot of changes. It's a really tough industry, and a lot of people are competing for not very many positions. And especially now, so many publications are just prioritizing freelance workers, but in doing so, overall, not really compensating people fairly. And then also, I think having an abundance of freelancers contributing, it really loses that like intentional like cohesion that used to come with magazines, because you're not really working as a team. You're not all together, like the planning meetings and the editorial meetings, like the editors are, but not every single writer is in those meetings, especially if you're like sending it off to freelancers. That might be where a lot of like the quality slip, the combination of just like online, a lot of it is like, oh, well, it's online, I don't need to buy the magazine. And then like if you put something exclusively in the magazine, nobody's really going to know that. And it's, yeah, there's just like so many different things contributing to like why it doesn't work anymore. But I mourn the golden days of like getting my Teen Vogue. Yeah, definitely.
I'll ask one, do you think there's a future for long form content and stuff like that? And two, if so, what does that look like, just given, the way the world works now?
I think maybe I can see us reaching a breaking point with the way that everything is just so like scattered and also like the same. Like everything is the same right now. Like you see the same headline in 5 different ways about the same thing like all the time. I don't know if if it would come in like a physical medium, but maybe like online like zines or something will like become a thing. Or like I think what really helps is if it's like sometimes being really niche and really specific is what can kind of endure, because it appeals to like a certain demographic who will come back, and you'll form kind of the loyalty with the medium. And I can see things like that maybe becoming a thing, or maybe they already are. Yeah, I don't know. I can see like everyone reaching kind of a burnout with where things are. And then through that burnout and frustration, wanting to like create their own things. And from there, maybe we'll get more long form that is maybe more similar to what it was like before. I don't know.
Totally. Sorry, I think it makes it hard when the creators they don't need someone else to get their message out anymore either, right? They have their own Instagrams, their own blogs, their own podcasts, their own things, that it's like, we also don't need these journalists to tell our story when we can do it first, which is also a bummer in some ways. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like you'll still see like the celebrity profile come up like when someone needs to promote something. But so often those are like, I see those being like bungled a lot lately. Like I remember a couple years ago, there was like a Rihanna profile, and the girl who was going to interview her was like, I didn't really prepare, but we're going into this. And it's like, what? Okay. Like, and even with like BTS, like Western media coverage of BTS is like abysmal. And oftentimes like when they are featured in more long form mediums, it's like, they didn't do enough research and this is insulting. And like, I don't know. So it's really like in some ways, I think artists having like the control of their own messaging is a good thing in many ways, because sometimes you can't trust the people who are putting out the information, like, but it does still exist in some way. I don't really know where I'm going with this. I think I'm just thinking out loud right now.
Yeah, no, it's a lament, right? A lament for something that you have clearly cared so much about, right? And it was an important part of your growing up and your career up to this point. And so it's hard when you see that stuff go. That's how I feel about albums, right? As a musician, like the fact that playlists have taken over and that like the album has become less important. You talked about deep diving and loving a Blink-182 record, today. And like, that's almost gone away. Like people are like, oh, what? Send me a song, send me a playlist, right? Like I don't want to listen to just one artist from beginning to end, and that's also the musician's lament.
Well, that's something that I actually really like about K-pop, where there is still a lot, I think, of importance placed on their albums. And I think a lot of it is also because they produce so much in like a year. They like always come back with like a mini album or like an album in some way. And also even like album packaging in K-pop is like an art form in and of itself. That is another component to why I'm interested in it. But I think that because K-pop has like such clear concepts, like you can tell that their albums are intentional in coinciding with those concepts as well. So you do want to like listen to a whole album in order in its entirety. At least I do. That's how I still consume music that way. When I like hear someone has a new album, like, okay, I have to listen to it from beginning to end, not shuffling it around. I need to hear like how it was intended. Like they put these songs in order for a reason. So that is, I think, another reason why I really like it, because it isn't like how it is, I think, more in like the Western music industry, where it's like, okay, we're dropping a single, like, and we're having like all these features, and like it's just like every once in a while. But I think there are still artists who do that, who do still release albums, but it's definitely not as much as it used to be, for sure.
All right, Holland. Well, we'll get you out here. But before we do, we ask 5 rapid fire questions to close out the show. So first thing here, if you could be on any reality TV show, which one would you choose?
Ooh, I think I'd be on The Challenge.
Oh,
MTV's The Challenge. Another thing that could have been on this list.
Awesome. That's great.
If I got in shape.
Awesome. If people have never consumed any of your pop 5, what's the one that you'd want them to go experience right now?
BTS, join the army. Let's do it.
So both Latchkey Sibs, your podcast now, or Degrassi, or the Whatever It Takes Degrassi podcast, who's a guest you would have loved to have had on either of your shows?
Oh my gosh. Well, we would have loved to have had Drake, or just like any of the actors from Degrassi. I did one time, I don't even know if this was real, but one time I was at a bar and I was like talking to some guy outside, and somehow it came up that he was cousins with the actress who played Hazel. And I was like, can I spin this into something? But obviously that like nothing ever came of it.
Yeah.
And like I tangentially have a connection to like Kevin Smith, but like that never would have happened. But yeah, maybe Drake.
Dang. Awesome. You can choose a Harry Potter or Degrassi character, but which one do you think closest resembles Holland?
Like the first thing that came to mind would like maybe be Hermione. Just like kind of like bookish. I definitely have know-it-all tendencies. I'm an oldest sibling, so I think I have similar vibes of like kind of always wanting to be in charge, whether it's like I'm actively pursuing that or if it's just subconscious. So maybe, I don't know, maybe Hermione.
Awesome. Okay. Last one here. What habit or quality do you think has contributed most to your success in the publication world?
Probably flexibility, or just like learning how to think on my feet and being able to like adaptability. That's the word. Learning how to adapt to any kind of situation and like to pivot and to like be able to be like, something went wrong. Okay, well now what can we do to make sure we're still on track? Like diving in headfirst and being adaptable, for sure.
Awesome. Well, why don't you tell people about Latchkey Sibs? I love that show. And where can people follow you?
So Latchkey Sibs is a podcast that I have with my 2 siblings where we go back and revisit childhood movies. But because we are siblings and like to butt heads, we made it competitive. And each week, one sibling defends a movie and the other 2 have to score it. And by the end of the season, whoever has the most points wins and gets to give out a punishment to the sibling who loses. And right now, we are doing themed months, and we are also randomly assigning movies to each sibling. So we do a draft every month that fits the theme, and we put it on a randomized wheel, and whatever movie you get, you have to defend. So I don't know when this is coming out, but November is Lindsay Lohan month, Lovember. December will be holiday movies.
That's amazing.
We're just wrapping up spooky Sibs month.
Santember was amazing.
Santembler, yeah. We did Adam Sandler movies. That was a time.
Yeah, my favorite episode, the Mr. Deeds episode, was so good. And I love Mr. Deeds. Like, so, I mean, I forgot about how good it was, so I went and rewatched it after when you guys were doing that one.
I was so pleasantly surprised by Mr. Deeds. Like, I was so afraid that it was going to age horribly. Like, for some reason, I thought it was going to be really bad. And then it was like so wholesome and wonderful. But yeah, awesome. Listen to the episode. So yeah, you can follow us at Latchkey Sibs on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And you can email us latchkeysibs@gmail.com. You can find us anywhere. We're Latchkey Sibs everywhere. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining, Holland. It was so much fun. It was like a wish list, and I'm so happy you agreed to join.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time, and I had such a good time. I don't even know what else to say. I love talking about things that I love, so I'm all about it.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, we might ask you back at some point. We're planning on doing like more deep dive episodes where we take something. So if Harry Potter or Degrassi or something comes up, we might have like a round table of people who also love these things. And so
perfect.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Holland. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks. Bye.
That'll do it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to support more of Holland's work, you can check out her 2 podcasts, Whatever It Takes, a Degrassi podcast, or Latchkey Sibs. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at MyPop5. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts. We'll see you next week. But until then, what's your Pop 5?